And moving horizons is simply what you're doing is you are basically manipulating your dopamine system in such a way that you can focus on a goal and chunk it down into small, meaningful pieces. Let me give you the context neurologically though. In any environment of stress, challenge, and uncertainty, our brains are trying to make certain that environment, and they're doing so along three factors. Probably more than three, but three primary factors. One is duration, how long this is going to last. Second is pathway, what's my route in, out, or through, and then third is outcome, what's the end state here.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to ALLSMITH, where we forge perspective, performance, and purpose, one rep at a time. Today, we're joined by a man who has stared uncertainty in the face and taught others to not only survive it, but to thrive within it. He's a retired Navy SEAL commander who served over 20 years, leading some of the most elite performers on the planet. He's completed more than a dozen overseas deployments and commanded at the highest levels of special operations. He's also helped architect the first ever Mind Gym, a training ground for physical, mental, and emotional resilience. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Rich Diviney. What's up, man?
Hey, Bryce. Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Stoked to unpack your story a little bit, man. And I always think it's super fun. It's a little awkward on the receiving end to kind of hear the intro and you're like, oh, I've done those things. I don't remember. That was this, that was that. It feels like almost a past life. But for people that don't know too much about you, like what's a little bit of a background? Like how would you describe yourself?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up in Connecticut. I'm an East Coaster, New Englander, I guess. I have a twin brother. I have an older sister, a younger brother, and an identical twin brother. And growing up, my dad was a private pilot. He loved to fly on the weekends, so he'd take us flying on the weekends. And so we grew up with a real love of aviation, and that kind of was a predominant thing in our lives. So that my brother and I immediately, I mean, from very young ages, wanted to be military pilots, and specifically Navy pilots, because we were like, well, Air Force is cool, but Navy, they have to land on ships, and there's nothing more badass than landing on a ship. So let's do that. And so the military, we were kind of those kids in high school where we knew exactly what we wanted to do, and the military was kind of the goal. And it was probably in the early 90s I discovered Navy SEALs. Really, no one knew what Navy SEALs were. They certainly weren't as near as popular as they are today. It was really weird for us to ride that wave of popularity. But I discovered them, and they said, kind of what they did, and I said, man, that's really cool. That could be something I want to do. And so ultimately, ended up at Purdue University in Indiana in RTC, and when it came time to pick, I knew I could be a pilot, but I didn't want to always wonder if I could be a SEAL. You talk about taking that chance and taking the leap because you don't want to have those regrets in older age. I didn't want to have a regret of not trying, so that's why I went SEAL. I tried out for SEAL training. I got accepted and then went in '96, and of course, fortunately, made it through it. And began a 21-year career in the SEAL teams, which became very kinetic, of course, after 2001. So, but served in several commands and as a commanding officer as well. Was in charge of training. It was really during that time, as I reflected, I'm very into, I think, as you are as well, the kind of a habit of introspection, self introspection. Kind of looking in and saying, okay, what is it about me? What are some things I can improve? What are the things I can maybe take away? And just being able to go through something like that, SEAL training, and look around and be like, man, how did I make it through this? Like, why am I still here? And having that, what I call this healthy imposter syndrome, that just drove me to be better, but also made me question, okay, what is it about me and what is it about the guys around me that allow us to do this? That really drove a lot of what I do today. Figuring that out, articulating it, and humanizing it in a way that we can then explain it to others so that they can become better, because I'm really very much about human potential, and I'm very interested in helping people explore their potential. Being around the world, being in some of the kind of the worst areas, quote worst areas, because the wars, you still encounter people, and one thing I'll say is that most people on this planet, regardless of where they live, are good people, and they care about their families, they care about the communities, they just want to live in peace and do right by themselves and their families. And so you'd see all these people in those environments, and I'd always wonder when I see some of these kids, especially, I'd say to myself, what's the potential of that human being, and is that human being going to be offered the opportunity to explore that potential? And so a lot of what I center my work around is helping people learn some tools so that they can explore their potential, because we don't know where the next Einstein's coming from. We don't know where the next great discovery is coming from, and the more we can drive and help people explore that, the greater opportunity we will find that person who helps us take the next leap. So yeah, that's
I really believe that we were cut from the same cloth. And in hearing you speak and just some of the unique ideations that have come through your life's experiences so far are they're familiar. And almost feel like they're tangible. And I can't help but reference so I have an ALLSMITH kind of online forum or group. And I threw in a video this morning from, what's that famous show called Ted Lasso?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the head coach pulls down on one of the episodes the sign "Believe" that he had right above the door, and it was kind of crooked, it was a little off, but he pulls it down, he rips it up, and everybody's like, "Oh!" All the players in the locker room, and he goes down this explanation of like belief comes from here, and I think that's the first step. Like when I self reflect on my father's legacy, there was so many intangibles, but at least from my personal experience, it was the first time I didn't just see and witness, but I could feel true belief. They're like, oh, wow, he believes in me because he gets a peek behind the curtain. He gets to see the work ethic and the preparation and the true care and the love that goes into sharpening the axe before it gets swung on a piece of wood,
Mm-hmm.
and the preparation that goes in before a podcast or before you enter the field of play. And not everybody sees that, but it develops a personal proof of concept when you look in the rearview mirror, you look over your shoulder, like I am who I say I am. But also having, one or two people that are like kind of pulling you along a little bit when you do have those moments of, like you said, a healthy dosage of imposter syndrome, I think is very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fact that you humanize that, as you described in your words, it doesn't make it where it's this ideological, untouchable, unrelatable Navy SEAL of like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm gonna figure it out. And you're just kind of stuffing, and like you sort of figured out buds and all the different tests and intangibles. And then later on you're a PED abuser and an alcoholic that doesn't really understand how you made it through, just right place, right time. And you didn't really, like you said, have that introspective moment of reflection of like, here's how we did this. Here's the recipe. It's adaptable. It's not a one size fits all 10-step process. And now you're creating this structure of belief, of love, of core values. And almost as I would describe in the relation of ALLSMITH, reaching a handout of like, hey, this isn't going to be easy. It's not a handout of like, I'm just throwing something out there. It's a hand of like, hey, I'm here as a support system to help guide you towards your peak expression. Take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How would you describe, that brief summary in relation to where you were and kind of how you are now, and how that belief system really helps pull out the best of some of your clients and the things that you're doing in modern day?
Well, I think it's paramount, to be honest with you. The idea that we can have belief in the first place, and we can actually ask ourselves and queer ourselves in terms of what are those things I I think I can do. Here's how I'll describe belief. Or I was once asked what the importance, or what the importance of faith was, and what the importance of confidence was, and a couple other questions. But I began to really think about this, and the way I broke it down for myself is I broke it down that faith is belief without evidence, and confidence is belief with evidence. And both are actually very important. And in some cases, one leads to another. In other words, we
Mm,
have to understand that when we're embarking upon something we've never done before, we have to invoke faith. We have belief without evidence. I know I can do this. I don't have any evidence, but I know I can. And then once you are in that, once you achieve or you start to do repetitive things, you can turn that into confidence. But both are just as important as each other. And I think to allow for people to even embark on the first piece, which is faith, you have to give them some evidence that they are capable as human beings. And the way that I go about doing that is to humanize everything that I've experienced. Take the Navy SEALs off the pedestal for a second, because after all, we are just regular dudes. We just found ourselves inside of a niche, inside of which we're able to excel. But as regular dudes, as humans, we have the same neurology of the same physiology as other human beings. And so there's things that we do that can then be articulated that other human beings can do, so they can start to explore that. And then, of course, removing judgment, which I try to do. I've always been able to do fairly effectively. I try to actually do for others more than I do for myself, because others will look at Navy SEALs and be like, "Oh, well, you guys, I mean, I can't even compare," and that's BS, right? I mean, it's fear is something that's subjective to the user, and something that makes me afraid is going to be different than something that makes someone else afraid, and the context might be different, and the challenge and the goal is to step through that, regardless of what that subjective environment is. And so removing judgment from others in terms of placing people on pedestals that are human beings. After all, we are all human, and so I encourage everybody to look at those that they look up to and respect and admire, and not degrade that admiration, but start to think of that person as the human they are, and then ask themselves, okay, what is it that that human was able to do? Because I have the same neurology, I have the same physiology, I have different attributes, I have different unique characteristics, certainly, but what are some of those things that may be ubiquitous that I can lean upon? And so really equalizing it and humanizing it is the strategy. And you
Yeah,
find you can
it's almost like making it where it's a low-hanging fruit, where it's a tangible and attainable goal,
yeah,
as opposed to like, oh man, that's so far up, like I shouldn't even try.
that's right. That's right.
And I think when we've looked at studies with rats and whatnot, like if it's not attainable, they won't even play.
Hmm.
But if they have this pseudo belief that, okay, like I'm going to get to do this and then I'm going to get to do that. And I think there's a famous study where they threw rats into a pool. And this is very relevant to SEAL training. And some of the rats just stayed in there for 24 hours straight, and they ended up dying because they didn't see light at the end of the tunnel. They couldn't shorten their ideation to think, oh, I need to make it to my next meal, which is what I've heard a lot of SEALs say. Hey, I need to make it to my next meal. I need to make it to the next rep. I need to just put one foot in front of the other. It's that short-term ideology. And it's tough sometimes because you're like, oh, if I just make it through buds, but it's like you're thinking too far ahead.
Right.
You got to do this thing before you do that thing. But then these other rats, they got thrown into the water. And then after about 4 hours, they got pulled out and they got to rest.
Hmm.
And they threw them in again. And after 8 hours, they pulled them out and they got to rest. And then they threw them in again. And all of a sudden they left them in. And because the rats believed that there was going to be a rest interval coming up,
Right.
they were able to elongate the duration of the first rats that had no clue. And they just gave up because they couldn't see the next little dopamine hit or the rest interval or whatever. What are your thoughts on that? And how does that relate to some of your past and some of your teachings now?
Well, man, it's actually relates directly. It's and this is when my second book, which just came out a couple months ago, Masters of Uncertainty. The primary tool I talk about is a tool called Moving Horizons, and Moving Horizons is simply what you're doing is you are basically manipulating your dopamine system in such a way that you can focus on a goal and chunk it down into small, meaningful pieces. Let me give you the context neurologically, though. In any environment of stress, challenge, and uncertainty, our brains are trying to make certain that environment, and they're doing so along three factors. Probably more than three, but three primary factors. One is duration, how long this is going to last. Second is pathway, what's my route in, out, or through, and then third is outcome, what's the end state here. And when we are in absence of one or more of those three, we start to find ourselves anxious and in uncertainty and angst. Let's take illness, for example. You and I, everybody, all the audience knows what strep throat is as an illness. We know strep throat. There's an antibiotic that can in fact cure strep throat. So if we were to get strep throats, we would know the pathway, the antibiotic, and we'd know the outcome. We're going to get better. We would be absence of duration, because you may respond to antibiotics a little bit differently than I do. It might take you a day to get better. It might take me 3 days. So we're in absence of one of the three, which means our anxiety uncertainty level is mild. Now let's take the flu. Flu, also a known illness, but there's no cure for the flu. There's nothing you can take specifically for the flu. There's a lot of people who have ideas, but but there's nothing specific you can take that'll cure the flu. So if we get the flu, we know the outcome. We're going to get better, because most people don't die from the flu, but we don't know the pathway and we don't know the duration, which means our anxiety uncertainty level is moderate. Now let's take a disease that shows up and no one's seen it before. There's no vaccine. There's no cure. Some people are dying and other people aren't. And we don't know how long this is going to spread throughout our society. Okay. If this sounds familiar, this is 2020. This is COVID. And in that case, we were in absence of all three. We were in absence of duration, pathway, and outcome. And we had maximum uncertainty and anxiety. All Moving Horizons does, which is exactly the process you just described. You chunk your environment. Moving Horizons does is it forces you to pick something to focus on, and in essence, you're creating a DPO. You're creating a duration, pathway, outcome. So in BUDS, in SEAL training, as you know, because you've worked with enough candidates, and most of your audience probably knows, you spend hundreds of hours running around with big, heavy boats. Okay, I remember being in Hell Week. We were running one of this. We had this boat on our head, as we always did. It was like 3 a.m, and we've been running with this damn thing for forever, seemed like. And we're on the beach, and we're next to a sand berm. And I remember saying to myself, because I was miserable, I remember saying to myself, you know what? I'm just going to focus on getting to the end of this sand berm. And what I did in that moment, inadvertently, was I picked a horizon and, in essence, created a DPO. Duration from now until I get to the end of the sand berm. Pathway from here to end of sand berm. And outcome, end of sand berm. And then I executed that DPO and gave myself the dopamine to get to that wicket, and then a dopamine reward at the end when I achieved that goal, which allowed me to come back out and pick another horizon. And so what you're talking about, which is the neurological equivalent of eating the elephant one bite at a time, is a process of every single human being picking and moving horizons as they move for challenge and stress. Now, like you said, those horizons have to be subjective to the individual and the severity of the environment. In other words, when I was freezing in the surf zone, sometimes my horizon was I'm going to count 5 waves. Sometimes my horizon was I'm going to make it to the next evolution. Sometimes make it to the next meal. Sometimes make it to the end of sand berm. But it's always shifting based on the environment. And what you're doing there is you're manipulating our dopamine system, your own dopamine system. Because what these rats didn't, what was going on in the rat experiment, there was another experiment with rats they did with dopamine, is that they were running out of dopamine. They did another experiment on rats where they had a couple rats next to a device where they hit a pellet and they'd hit a lever and a tasty pellet would come out and they'd eat the pellet, right? So of course the rats would just sit there they put the rat right next to the lever. So they just hit that lever and get pellet after pellet. Then they moved the rats about a rat length away from the lever. And of course they walked over to the lever, started hitting that lever. Then they removed the rats about a rat length away, and they removed the dopamine from the rats. Rats didn't even move. They didn't even move. They just sat there, and they would have starved if they let them. When we pick a horizon, when we pick a chunk that's too big, what's happening is we're running out of dopamine before we get there. And whenever we run out of dopamine, we quit. All quitting is you've run out of dopamine along the way, right? So you have to manage your horizons in a way that you're picking the right amount of distance, so that you're not running out of dopamine, but also not too short, so that when you're getting there, you actually register the reward. So if it's too small of a horizon, you won't register the reward. Too long of a horizon, you'll run out before you get there. And this is exactly the neurological equivalent of what you're talking about. And it's the secret to making it through any level of challenge, uncertainty, and stress in any environment.
It's very well said, Rich. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt can just overwhelm us and take over as these pseudo lenses get placed on our eyes, and it's very difficult to defog when those things just start to over marinate not just our logic but our emotion.
Yeah. Well, and fear specifically, I would say fear specifically. One of my good friends who many people know him is Andrew Huberman, Dr. Andrew Huberman. He and I have been friends for many years. before even the podcast, and we did a lot of work together on fear. He was running a fear lab there at Stanford, and I was interested in the neuroscience he was looking into. He was interested in how Navy SEALs kind of move through that stuff, and so we studied this together. In fact, a lot of the DPO stuff we came up with together. But one of the things we discovered and really theorized or hypothesized about is that fear is in fact a combination of two factors. Those factors are uncertainty plus anxiety, right? If you have one and not the other, you don't necessarily have fear, right? You can be anxious but not uncertain. You have to give a presentation next week at the office, for example. You know the presentation, you know the people you're going to give it to. There's not much fear there. You're just a little anxious. In fact, there's not any fear. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve. We know that there's no fear there. When you combine the two, you start to get fear. And this is the type of uncertainty we're talking about, the uncertainty plus anxiety that equals the fear. The way you begin to manage your fear or even buy down your fear is you buy down either one or both of those factors. You buy down uncertainty, and you do that through moving horizons because you're creating certainty in micro moments, or you buy down anxiety, which you can do through breathing techniques and visual tools. But when you buy down both of those things, you begin to remove fear, and that allows you to act, and it's incredibly powerful.
I love that. When you look at this DPO formula that you've created, and you're thinking about a pathway forward and you're thinking about outcome, what happens when injury interjects within that or illness?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes within buds, we see, pneumonia-like symptoms, we see stress fractures, we see tendonitis based on this constant rucking, sleep deprivation, temperature changes, and then all of a sudden things start to creep in that maybe creeped in a little bit during training, but you knew a training, interval was going to be about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in buds, that duration is, you don't know. So that's that first component that you talked about. But like, if you don't see a path forward, i.e., a tib fib fracture, which seemingly is pretty common based on rucking with boats and boots and soft stand, the Murph evolutions that we've heard about constantly throughout buds. And then you think about the outcome of like, okay, I might become a Navy SEAL, but I might not ever be able to walk again.
Mm-hmm.
I might never have the same gait. I might have X, Y, and Z consequence, which maybe seemingly is like the epitome of what we're seeing in Hollywood right now. Hey, I might get the deal. I might make millions of dollars, but I'm going to have to sell my soul with this group of people. I mean, everything costs something, as you know. What are your thoughts when injury or illness creep in and you end up having to make that big decision in a micro moment without being able to like dance that off of your circle of trust?
Yeah, I think the good news is you just go back to the simplicity of the formula. You create smaller horizons. What we have to understand about anxiety specifically is that anxiety is fiction. Okay, because anxiety is always in front of us. Just like the past is history, then future is fiction. Okay, and anxiety is something that we're projecting that we think is going to happen, but has not happened yet. And so it is in all essences fiction. You will never see Navy SEALs worry about that which they can't control in the moment. That does not preclude proper planning, of course. Okay, we'll plan things out and we'll say if this happens, we'll do that. But what we won't do is worry about shit we can't control. And I think the students that make it through buds are the students that figure this out because you have to have it as a Navy SEAL. If you get injured, and I've had friends who've gotten injured in buds, the thing they focused on in the moment was like, okay, I have the main goal. That's fine. I am going to shift my horizons and focus on getting better here right now. What's the first thing? Focus on this, focus on that. And they shorten their horizons and they start stepping through what they need to get better, because you're still creating certainty by creating that horizon, and you're managing your anxiety by not or you're actually taking away anxiety by not worrying about shit that hasn't happened yet. And so I think in any of these cases we can find ourselves in spirals because we're letting the future, the fiction, take over the narrative, and that is a death sentence to any dream. So I encourage people not to.
Yeah, for sure. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your training and your intangible attributes. For you, what are the most underrated attributes people should be training for modern day adversity?
Yeah, great question. And I'm gonna caveat the question off the bat by saying it could be any one of the 41. And the reason is because uncertainty by definition is unknown. And so depending on the flavor of uncertainty, you could find yourself in an environment where, charisma is what you need in the moment. All right. However, I won't gaff the question off because I think in many environments, probably the majority of environments, there are a couple attributes that really come into play. One is compartmentalization. And the reason why is because compartmentalization as an attribute is this ability to focus on something and maintain focus on that, blocking out everything else until completion. So the essence of the ability to move horizons comes from compartmentalization as an attribute. So I think that's a very important one. Another important one would be courage. Now, courage is not, it has nothing to do with what you do for a living. So in other words, one could make the assumption, well, Navy SEALs are all super courageous. And that may be true. It may not be true. But I will say that fear, as it rises in a human being, as the autonomic arousal goes up and the amygdala gets tickled, that happens subjectively. So you could have literally a group of Navy SEALs in a gunfight with Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan who are in that moment feeling less fear than the 8-year-old you just asked to step in front of the classroom and introduce themselves. So when it comes to courage as an attribute, it's really about how often are we stepping into our fear, because that's where the courage switch lives in our brain. As fear rises, amygdala gets tickled. We have two switches in our brain that we all know. One is fight, one is flee. And those are separate switches. Neuroscience has determined that whichever one you choose, a specific switch gets clipped. If we choose the courage switch, step into our fear, we get a dopamine reward for that. And that is known as the courage switch. But what it tells us is something that we've all known philosophically, and now we know neurologically. And that is you cannot access that courage switch in the absence of fear. If you're not afraid, you're not accessing that switch, which means you can have a generally anxious person who's walking through life, and every single day, because they're constantly stepping into their discomfort, they're stepping into their fear, they're very high on courage. You could have someone who does crazy stuff for a living, and they don't get afraid as easily as other people. They're not accessing that courage switch. So courage as an attribute is not about what you think you do or how anxious you think you are. Courage is about how habitually do you step into your discomfort. And so I think courage, compartmentalization, adaptability, certainly, you have to be able to flex and flow and move with the environment. I think those are probably the top 3 attributes for handling challenge, adversity, and stress in any environment. If you focus on those, you're going to do pretty well.
The Trident family taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good, bad, and everything in between. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I start my day with the Sweet Cream Cold Brew as I am prepping my mind and body for fitness, service, coaching, and podcasting. With various locations in San Diego, they offer over 14 nitro cold brews and a variety of specialty drinks. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from the Keto Bakery. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code ALLSMITH to take your coffee experience to the next level. In my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, but I really believe this is why we've seen huge benefit from contrast therapy being very hot sauna for long duration and very cold plunges for relatively low duration, but still high exposure. And what's so interesting to me is, now that it's pop culture and trendy and, great for the gram, everybody wants to do it and then get that dopamine hit of like, hey, I'm badass, I did the thing. But there's levels to that game, right? Like how much courage was flexed? How frequently do you do it? What was the temperature? What was the time domain? And sometimes it doesn't have to be a metric or a measurable, because I truly believe that everything that's measured doesn't always count. Everything that counts isn't always measured. Mm-hmm. But I do think like having the willingness to expose yourself to something that is going to challenge your courage, is going to challenge your fear. You don't always know the duration. You don't always know the outcome. You don't always know the pathway. But then you lean into that confidence, like you said, which is, you know what? I've done this enough times that I'm not going to pass out. Or I'm with these people that I love and trust, and if I pass out, I'm going to be okay. Yeah. And if I prepare it accordingly and I hydrate it accordingly, I'm going to be okay. And there's obviously boundaries that you play within that for safety. I'm not saying everybody should do these things until they pass out by any means. But I do think there's something physiologically that sometimes gets shut down by this broad and inclusive social media world. It's like, oh, you shouldn't cold plunge. It's going to be bad for your muscle mass, or, women shouldn't cold plunge, or, it's too much of this or too much of that. And it's like, at the end of the day, you're doing something very challenging that allows you to flex that courage muscle. And then, like you said, moves that horizon just a little bit, where it allows you to expand your capacity, which then makes you a more resilient, better human.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have said it better, in the sense that, obviously these tools have physiological benefits, and anybody could argue any one of them, because they do. However, one of the things, especially certainly cold plunge, and I have a cold plunge in my garage. It's a poor man's cold plunge. It's just a chest freezer that I caulked the edges and filled with water and ice, but it
That
works,
Flex
right?
Seal, baby.
Yeah.
That Flex Seal is awesome.
That's right. Yeah, it's awesome, and it's 33 degrees, so that's what I need. But one of the things that, and we actually, Huberman and I discovered this, again, probably 7 or 8 years ago when we started doing this, and cold plunging wasn't the thing it is now. Cold plunging
Mhm.
is one of the best ways to practice the moving horizons method, because it is a very hard thing to do. And this is how I got my wife and my son wanted to try it. And I said, okay, as soon as you get in, I want you to stare at my hand and count to 10. All right. So I gave them their first horizon. And as soon as they did that, I said, okay, pick another point and pick a number and count to that. And both of them got through a minute and a half their very first time. So that's one thing. It allows you to practice this, which is what you're implying, which is correct. Let's practice this discipline, because it's a tool that you can practice and get better at, so that the masters, actually, we do it without thinking. But there's another thing that has to be mentioned. This is the really coolest part of this, and it's neurological. In our brains, there's a small part of our brains that neuroscientists have discovered. It's called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. Okay, it's a small part of the brain that they discovered. Neuroscientists discovered that when it gets activated, it's activated when a human is either in the anticipation of doing a hard thing or
Mm.
does a hard thing. It gets activated. Every time we activate this by anticipation and doing a hard thing, this part of our brain grows and develops. And they've linked this part of our brain and the growth and development of this brain to a couple things. First, longevity. People who have grown it more and developed it longer live longer. And B, with a willingness and an ability to do hard things more often. So in other words, you're literally growing the part of your brain that allows you to do hard things more often, and therefore affect your life, your longevity. I think it's a fascinating concept, because again, once you put neuroscience to this stuff, it starts to humanize everything and ubiquitize everything. And you start saying, hey, no longer can someone give me an excuse that I'm a Navy SEAL and they're not. It has nothing to do with Navy SEAL. It has to do with, hey, you can access this part of your brain and practice it. And it can be subjective. Doing a hard thing for me might look different than doing a hard thing for you or someone else. It's very subjective, but if you do this, you will actually activate that. You'll grow it, you'll develop it, you'll be able to do hard things more often, and you'll live longer, which is phenomenal.
That's super cool. What I really love about your description there too is just the deconstruction of ego. I think sometimes there is a, do you know who I am?
Yeah.
Do you know that I'm a Navy SEAL? Like, I'm built different. I'm uncommon amongst the uncommon. And it creates this barrier to entry. And I think because you've realized that, like, hey, I'm just a normal human in pursuit of my human potential. And now I just want to give you guys the tricks of the trade as to how I create structure into how I kind of recalibrated my mindset in the midst of doing hard things. And that leads me to this next quote and question that I think very much relates to you, which is, stress isn't the enemy.
Right.
Our relationship to it is. And so my question for you is, like, how do you break down how someone can reframe stress to become their training partner,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to their downfall or something that they just want to be avoidant of?
Yeah, that's a great one. And I would say stress and fear are both to be considered here. And the difference, again, anxiety is fiction, stress is present, right? Stress is in the now. It means you're physiologically responding to something that's at least in the moment being considered disruptive or detrimental. Stress is designed by nature, by whatever. It's designed in us to get us moving, get us up and moving to do things, right? When we are hungry, we begin to feel stressed, and that's designed to get us up to go find food. When we're lonely, we begin to feel stressed. That's designed to get us up to go find companionship. And so one of the best ways to reframe stress is to undemonize it and say, this is designed, this is nature's design to get us moving. Think about it. When we're completely relaxed and completely peaceful and passive, we're not really motivated to do much. we just, we're just sitting there, right? It's the stress that actually gets us up and moving. And so we have to, the relationship with stress for us needs to be one of, hey, this is by design making me think and get up to move. It's putting me a little bit on edge. And so I think once we do that, that's one way we can reframe it and say, this is a positive thing. The other way we can reframe it is most of us know the difference between distress and eustress. Okay. Distress defined as detrimental for the user, eustress defined as beneficial for the user. Now we all know eustress because all of us who work out, we go and we tear our muscles apart when we lift weights, and then we recover so that they actually grow back together and grow bigger. That's eustress. However, a lot of distress can in fact be reframed to eustress. Now, sometimes not in the moment. It's a little bit harder to do in the moment, but certainly after the fact, after you go through a stressful period or a period of which you consider distressful, a point at which you can look back and reflect as subjectively or as objectively as you possibly can and ask yourself some questions like, okay, what did I learn? How did I grow? How did that whole situation make me different? How did that change me for the better? These are ways we can reframe distress into eustress. And in many, many cases, one is able to do that. Sometimes the recovery period takes a little bit longer. In other words, you have to be able to look back and be objective about looking back on it. So if you still hold emotion around that stressful or that distress, you may need help getting over that. That's why if it's very traumatic, go get help. Don't try this on your own. But I mean, a lot of psychology and psychiatry in terms of helping people with PTSD, for example, is centered around this idea of, if not just de-triggerizing stress events and traumatic events, but can you in fact at some point reframe them and begin to achieve post-traumatic growth, PTG, which is also a thing. And so this reframing can allow us to turn PTSD into PTG, post-traumatic growth, if we do that. And then finally, fear, which is also to be considered. Fear is nature's risk assessment tool. All right. It is designed to put us on alert and tell us there is something out there, pay attention, focus, get some adrenaline, and deal with the problem. I will say, and I was told this by an officer as a young JO, beware the fearless leader, because that guy's going to get you killed. I can't stand the word fearless. I mean, if I saw fearlessness in my units or around me, I would route it out, because fearlessness leads to complacency and arrogance and mistakes. We want that level of fear to keep us on tap, to keep us alert. So the relationship with fear has to be considered a very healthy one. What we don't want to do is have fear debilitate us from acting and taking action. But it certainly is absolutely necessary and essential in keeping us safe, keeping us alert, keeping us attuned to the threats around us. So I think those are a couple ways we can reframe and begin a different relationship with both stress and fear.
Man, there's so much to unpack there that, I mean, you just like, I was like, my heart was lit on fire right there. That was so much gold. But the first thing that comes to mind is just fear is a great motivator, right? How much have we heard that in athletics? And, there's the fake fear, or the fake fear ideology, or the bravado chest, smacking of like, oh, I'm not scared. That's usually an indicator that there's some fear there. Yeah. And I think it's trying to create this false positivity in the moment, but in reality, you're on high alert. And I think what's interesting, and you probably relate to this, but like, I've heard the phrasing before from Rich Roll and a few others, but it seems to be something around pain is the only thing that really gets people to change. And that can be, pain that can be digested into discomfort. That can be, a version of rock bottom for an addict. That can be interjected maybe a little bit with fear, in the sense of like, hey, if I don't change this behavior, here is the consequence. Right. And the fear of the consequence makes you improve your behavior. Otherwise, you experience the thing you don't want to experience. Yeah. And so inevitably, like we're tinkering in the lane of behavior change.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good observation. The way you described that was very cool, because we as a society have become really addicted to certainty.
Yes.
And that's why I love that you talked about uncertainty. But the greatness is really revealed in the uncertainty, for sure.
Yes.
And what's so interesting about that is, you were on Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson, and he talks about the region beta paradox,
Mm-hmm.
which is the land of comfortable complacency.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm in this place. I get a paycheck. I got health insurance. I sort of make decent money, but I'm not really fulfilled. I don't really want to take the leap because then it comes with these set of problems and this fear. Or I'm in this relationship and she's okay. I don't know if she's my wife. I don't really know if she makes me better, but it's comfortable. I don't really want to start over and meet new in laws and do the whole shebang.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to stay here. But in reality, that leads to stagnation,
Yes. Yeah.
right? When you get a little bit marinated in that level of certainty, you start to grow,
Yeah.
you start to spread your wings.
Well, you say
And
that,
it's,
by the way, you say that, and you say that very deftly, because in a quote in my book at the beginning of the book from Eric Fromm is uncertainty is the very condition to impel man to unfold his powers. And I put that
mm,
quote very specifically because what you said is absolutely true. It drives us to do better. It drives us to explore. It drives us to do more than we otherwise would. And so again, I think it's so important for us to develop a relationship with fear that's healthy because it's critical in our ability to grow.
totally. How can someone build the muscle to perform well in uncertain environments?
Yeah, that requires practicing these tools, and specifically the tool of moving horizons, which I talk about in depth in the book. So, moving horizons is something you can practice really in any domain. You don't have to have uncertainty around you to practice moving horizons. And you know this as well as I do. You can do this in the gym. There's not a lot of uncertainty in the gym, but you can still break a workout into small chunks, which most of us do anyway, because I don't want to think about the whole damn workout. I do hill sprints. I put a weight vest on and I do sprints up a hill here where I live. I don't like doing it. I dread it every time. And when I start my hills, I usually try to do 5 hills. I don't think about all 5 when I start, and I've been doing it for a long time. So
Hmm.
I'm still picking horizons. You can do this at work when you're putting together presentations. You can do this anywhere. So practice the act and art of moving horizons is one. And then I would encourage people to start thinking about some of those things they bring into uncertainty that are unique to themselves. And I talk about 3 aspects in the book. One is the objective. So in other words, what's the overall objective of the goal that you're striving towards? This objective is probably the big thing, right? So for seals or for wannabe seals, it's make it through buds, right? That's the overall objective. But just like you said, once I have the overall objective, I have to be able to let it go. I always say, keep your eyes off the prize. You know that's there, but I can't think about making it through buds. I got to think about making it through Hell Week, and even in Hell Week, I got to think about making it through this one evolution. But the objective is important. If you don't have an objective, you don't have something concrete to anchor on. The next is our attributes. What attributes are we uniquely bringing to situation? And then third is identity. What identities are we bringing into situations? Because that drives our behavior in very unique ways. So practice by understanding and practicing the tools, and get really good at what you can expect from yourself by diving into some of those unique factors about yourself. In other words, objectives, attributes, and identities.
Hmm. Life's inevitably going to grab us, in any way, shape, or form. I always say people are either in adversity, just left it, or they're approaching it. That's why I love the phrasing forged, not found.
Yeah.
But drive is the relentless pursuit of a goal despite external or internal obstacles. And so what comes to mind there is, for you personally, where does your drive come from? And how do you help others find theirs when it's seemingly lost and life is getting a hold of them and they seemingly are wearing these glasses of, I just lost a loved one, my kid's going through this, I've got financial distress, I've got this injury, whatever things are seemingly obstacles in front of the path forward.
Yeah.
How do you help people kind of find their goal when life's kind of dragging them in different directions?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question, and I'm not sure I have the a specific or right answer. I think what I would posit is to help them try to figure out something in front of them that's brighter, some sort of future that's brighter, whatever that might look like. It might look like financial, it might look like familial or relationship wise, it might look like something in the job, but try to find something that's brighter that they can anchor on. That would be an objective, and then really help them understand that as you move towards that goal, movement is what counts. Decision making and movement is what counts. It's not necessarily going to go. In fact, it's almost never going to go the way you think it's going to go. The climber that's staring at the top of the cliff that he's about to climb, he or she is about to climb, looks at the top and says, "Yes, that's the objective," and then it likely maps out just visually a pathway that they think they're going to climb. Except every single climber knows that they have to get on that rock and start climbing to see what works, and they're going to inevitably come to a point where they thought they were going to go one way and they realize, "Oh, I can't go that way. I got to go. I was going to go up and left, but now I got to go down and right because that's the next best foothold." And what they're going to be doing in that moment is going to be moving away from their objective. It's going to feel like they're moving away from their objective, but it's so that they can get a better foothold and handhold so they can start moving towards their objective. So in the conduct of any goal, what everybody has to realize is that as we move through the accomplishment, as we pick these horizons, it's inevitably going to at some points feel like you're moving away from it. That's not to be taken seriously. you are simply getting a better foothold and handhold so you can continue to move forward. So that's how we have to understand that. We have to be resolute in the outcome, but flexible in the approach and the conduct of the goal. And so I think
And also,
people
just to bookmark you there real quickly,
yeah,
it's like if you relate that to the gym, because you've done such a beautiful job of creating a transferable ideation for our listeners today from the gym to the real world.
yeah,
Periodization is not always linear, man.
right,
You might have an injury, you might travel, you might not have the right equipment, you might not be feeling good, X, Y, and Z, sleep, food, whatever stresses or imposed barriers come in the way. That's a perfect example of an analogy of like, man, planning the thing isn't doing the thing, thinking about the thing isn't doing the thing, sharpening the axe isn't doing the thing.
yeah,
You go and you do the thing, you realize like, wow, that path looked really good. The texture, the architecture wasn't ideal for our finger foothold. We got to redirect, and we need to kind of pull that bow back a little bit, which isn't going to feel good in that moment, but it's the right thing to do in order to create that forward momentum in a slightly different path
yeah,
up the mountain, like you said.
Yeah. Free is the way to be. Life beats us up a bit and causes some bumps and bruises, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on the sidelines. This is why we've partnered with Kinyon Labs. Get back to doing what you love with this incredible portable device designed to get you back in the game. Kinyon is on a mission to move people from pain to possible with their top-rated red light therapy and laser solution, which tackles inflammation along with muscle and joint pain quickly and effectively. What I love is that it's portable and rechargeable, making it easy to actually incorporate into my everyday life consistently. It's small and lightweight, so you can throw it in your gym bag or work bag, or even an overnighter. Kinyon's lasers and LED combo make this cutting-edge device extremely versatile for use with general aches and pains, as well as chronic back pain, arthritis, post-surgery recovery, endometriosis, and more. This has been an amazing tool keeping my elbows and knees pain-free for pressing, pulling, and squatting in the gym. Great tools like the Move Plus give me the freedom and flexibility to continue living life on my terms without limitations. There are a lot of reasons why over 15,000 people are using this device and rating it 4.7 stars and above. Head on over to kinyon.io and use code ALLSMITH at checkout to begin your pain-free journey.
And I would offer this, I'd just throw another term that I talk about a lot in terms of performance. And I try to make the distinction between peak performance or a distinction from peak performance, because when I began kind of researching this years and years ago, I was surrounded, and I think even today we're surrounded by this term peak performance. It's everywhere. Everybody wants to be peak here, peak there, peak everywhere. And and people used to tell me, you Navy SEALs are the ultimate peak performers. And I used to disagree with that statement. And the reason why I would disagree with that statement.
I disagree a lot.
Yeah. But well, the reason why I disagreed is because peak by definition is an apex. There's only one place you can go from an apex, and that is down. Okay. The other thing about peak is that peak often has to be planned for and scheduled and prepared for. The pro football player plans and schedules his entire week so that he can peak for 3 hours on Sunday. All right. We don't get to do that. Navy SEALs don't get to do that. Regular people don't get to do that. What we are, in fact, and I used to describe us as this, I still do, is we are optimal performers. Optimal performance means I'm going to do the very best in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment. Now, sometimes our best in the moment looks like peak and everything's flow states and clicking and groovy and cool. Sometimes our best in the moment, however, is we are just head down, grinding it out, gutting it out, going step by step, because that's all we have right now. And it's dirty and it's gritty and it's ugly and it's hard. And that is still performing optimally. And so this allows us a couple things. First of all, it allows us to celebrate those times when we are not at peak, because we can't be peak all the time. Sometimes we are grinding out and it's dirty and it's gritty. I can't tell you how many ops we went on in Iraq and Afghanistan. We come back like, man, that was ugly, but we still got the job done. Okay. The other thing optimal performance allows us to do is what I call responsible energy management. In other words, I don't have to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. I can be at some other energy level. A lot of people, there's so many TV shows and movies about Navy SEALs, and they may have seen a group of SEALs getting ready to go on a mission, and they're getting ready to go out the helicopter, for example, and they all huddle up and they're hoo-yawing and high-fiving like some sports team getting ready to take the field. That never happens. Okay, never. In fact, most of the time we'd be in our helicopters flying into combat, and the guys around me would be napping. They'd be asleep. And the reason for that, because we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's going to be required of us energetically, how long we're going to be out there, what's going to happen. So we're not going to waste an ounce of our energy doing things we don't need to do. So we should always strive for this optimal performance umbrella underneath which peak lives, gutting it out lives, and even recovery lives. And even in the conduct of a goal, and we'll just take working out, for example, while the periodicity is not, it's not linear, right? Different things work different ways. What is a constant in the fitness journey is doing something, getting something done. And so
action is always greater than inaction.
That's right. Yeah. Great example. Last weekend we had Father's Day. We had a great Father's Day. I had family over, probably drank a little bit more than I should, celebrating and things like that. Next Monday morning is my hill day, and I typically do kind of a mild warm up in the 5 hills. I start running. I'm like, oh my god, I feel like absolute crap right now. So okay, I'm just going to do what I can do. I'm going to do the best I can do in the moment. I ended up doing my lap and doing 1 hill, but I still did something. I still moved. I got something done. And so we have to let ourselves off the hook of trying to create the perfect scenario every time. And if we just commit to a movement, if we commit to doing something, commit to picking a horizon and go and moving that horizon, we will create a habit of doing this, and we'll find ourselves on a journey that's positively wired versus negatively.
I'm so happy that we got to this point in the conversation, because there's such a huge difference between training and testing.
Yeah.
Right. And training it's the volume, it's the reps. I love that meme that I've seen on social media where it's like 7 different like circles, and each one is, a different version of your 100% for that day.
Yeah.
So the first one might be full. The second one, it's like, oh man, I had a late night meeting. My kid was up all night. I'm stressed. My wife and I got in a fight because the kid was up all night. So now it's like you got like 5% here. It's like your 5% on that Tuesday is actually your 100%.
Yeah.
Because you're saving energy to be like, what matters in my life is actually recalibrating things with my family.
Mm-hmm.
The gym isn't number 1 in that moment. The gym is actually, number 7 that day.
Right.
And like, I loved what you described there, because it goes back to your good friend Simon Sinek when he talks about the habit of getting to the fucking gym.
Yeah.
Maybe you drive to the gym and that was your first barrier. Okay, cool. I got there. Then the next day you drive to the gym, you take a tour and you look at your budget and you're like, I'm not sure. Okay, cool. The next day you drive to the gym, you look at your budget, you're like, you know what? Here's my credit card down. I'm going to commit for 1 month. And then the 4th day, you're like, you know what? I'm going to go to the gym. I already have my membership. I'm going to walk inside and I'm going to see like, okay. And every day you're building a little bit more resilience. And then all of a sudden you're the person that walks in, you're on the Stairmaster, you're on the treadmill, then you start lifting weights, then you start making friends, then you develop a community, then you develop a relationship with a personal trainer. And it starts with that original onset of momentum. And before you know it, like you described, it becomes that level of unconscious competence, right, where now it's not, I think I need to push myself to go to the gym. It's like, no, this is just who I am.
Yeah.
This is what I do.
Yeah.
And then you self-reflect and it's like, oh, wow, I lost all that weight. I started gaining muscle mass. I have a better relationship with my family, with my kids, with my community. I'm more capacity at work. I'm making more money. And it starts with, like you said, those habits, those ingrained disciplines of like, you know what? I'm not testing today, but I'm going to do my best with the tools that I have.
Yeah. And what that is, by the way, is horizon shift. That's moving horizons right there. You are just
Yes.
picking horizons to focus on. In the book, I talk about a guy who I met at one of the talks I was giving. He came up to me afterwards. He introduced himself and he told me he was an ultra runner. And, I know, everybody, pretty much your whole audience knows ultra running. These are 50 to 100-mile races. It's insane levels of running. And I said, I was curious. I said, how did you get into ultra running? He's like, well, you may not believe this, but I used to be 400 pounds. And I said, whoa, tell me that story. He's like, well, I was deeply unhealthy and deeply upset with who I was. And I said to myself, you know what? I need to get healthy. I'm going to commit to, I'm going to start running. I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to commit to running a marathon. I said, okay, what'd you do? He's like, well, I went home and I ordered running shoes. So the running shoes came and I said, tomorrow morning, I'm going to put on my running shoes, which he did. So the next morning I said, I'm going to put on my running shoes and walk to the front door, which he did. Next morning, he put them on, walked to the mailbox. Next morning, walked to the end of the street, and then so on and so forth. Just every horizon, he just pushed it a little bit further and further and further until, several months later, he was running his first race. And then maybe a year or two later, he was running a marathon. So this is horizon shifting. This is how we build habits. This is how we build new identities. And it's all about managing our dopamine, managing our steps, managing our horizons in a way that allows for us subjectively to start walking ourselves into a goal.
I love it, Rich. I know we're tight on time today and I got to get you out. But I just want to throw this huge piece of gratitude your way, just kind of unpacking, managing horizons, and just kind of, you drop so many different gems and gold nuggets for people to hold on to. We definitely have to do this again because we have all the other chapters of the book to explore, tons of quotes to unpack and layers of the onion that need to be peeled back. But dude, if you could leave, some sort of bit of wisdom with people as far as managing fear, managing their goals, and finding ways to create a little bit of momentum, what would you kind of leave people with?
I would leave people with this idea that the stuff we talked about today and the stuff I talk about in my book, it's not new to anybody. Every single human being who's listening has done this to some capacity. We've all chunked our environment in some capacity. The secret is start to figure out what you did, introspect, interrogate your previous performance, and repeat. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. This is not new stuff. It's very human stuff. We are courageous creatures. We get a dopamine reward for stepping into our fear very deliberately by nature. And it's caused us to go from cave dweller to space explorer. And we all have this. And so maximize and capitalize on the neurology that we're all given, the gift of the neurology we're all given in terms of this system inside of us. And then go on and explore your potential. We'll never reach our potential. It's impossible to reach your potential. You're always exploring your potential, but that exploration is always done outside our comfort zone. So go and get outside your comfort zone.
Love it, man. Rich, where can people find you?
Yeah, great. Best place is theattributes.com, our website. So it's www.theattributes.com. There you can find the books, you can find our assessment tool, all that stuff. I'll pass you guys a link so people can get there. But yeah, and I'm also on LinkedIn, obviously, Rich_Diviney, or Rich Diviney on LinkedIn, and then Rich_Diviney on Instagram. And so check us out. And I'd love to do this again. I'll try to come out to San Diego so we can do it in person. So.
That'd be amazing, man. You really do a great job of creating simple structure around complex ideas and making things tangible resources for people to integrate actionables into their day-to-day life. And so I really enjoyed our conversation today, man.
Me too, my friend. It's great to be introduced. I'm glad I know you now. So thank you.
Likewise. Guys, if you enjoyed my conversation with Rich Diviney, please rate, review, subscribe, and as always, share with your friends. And stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Until next time. Appreciate you, Rich.
You as well. Thanks.